The winter of 1944 brought more than snow to the small Belgian town of Bastogne. It brought war, death, and a quiet determination that would change everything. Staff Sergeant Margaret Maggie Sullivan stood in the frozen mud outside the command tent, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter December air. She was 26 years old, 5'4", with hands calloused from years of farm work back in Iowa. Those same hands now gripped the maintenance manual for the M2 Browning machine gun, the weapon the Army called Ma Deuce. Inside the tent, she could hear them talking about her. Again. "A woman on the 50 cal," Lieutenant Morrison's voice carried easily through the canvas. "Captain, with all due respect, this is the front lines. We need someone who can handle that beast." Captain Davis sighed. Maggie had heard that sigh before. She scored highest in her training class, Tom, higher than any man in this company. Training is one thing, combat is another. That gun weighs 84 pounds. The tripod's another 44. You really think she can move it under fire? Maggie's jaw tightened. She'd heard variations of this conversation at Fort Bragg, at Camp Kilmer on the transport ship across the Atlantic, and now here just miles from the German lines. It never got easier. "I think," Captain Davis said slowly, "that we're short on trained gunners, and Sullivan knows that weapon better than anyone else we've got. She stays on the gun." Morrison's footsteps stomped toward the tent flap. He emerged, nearly walking into Maggie. His face reddened when he saw her. "How much of that did you hear?" he asked. "Enough, sir." He looked her up and down, his expression somewhere between pity and disgust. "Look, Sullivan, I don't have anything personal against you, but when the shooting starts, men are going to die if that gun jams. Can you live with that?" "The gun won't jam, sir, not if I'm on it." Morrison shook his head and walked away, muttering something about politics and desk generals. Maggie waited a moment, then entered the tent. Captain Davis looked up from his maps. He was a good officer, fair but tired. They were all tired. "You don't have to prove anything, Sullivan," he said quietly. "Yes, sir, I do." He studied her for a long moment. "Your position is on the northeast corner of town. Corporal Jenkins and Private First Class Rodriguez are your team. Jenkins feeds, Rodriguez spots and carries ammo. You command that gun. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "The Germans are massing for a push. Intelligence says they're bringing everything they've got. Tigers, Panthers, half-tracks, the works. Your job is to stop anything that moves on that road." Maggie nodded. She'd seen the intelligence reports. The German offensive was coming, and soon. The brass called it the Ardennes offensive. The men were already calling it something else, the last desperate roll of the dice. She found her position an hour later. Someone had sandbagged a second-story window in what used to be a bakery. The owners were long gone, fled, or dead. The smell of old bread still lingered, mixing with the sharper scent of gunpowder and oil. The M2 was already mounted, its barrel pointing down the main road into town. Maggie ran her hands over the weapon like a pianist checking her instrument before a concert. Barrel, receiver, bolt, feed tray, everything in order. "So you're Sullivan." She turned. Corporal Jenkins stood in the doorway, a tall man with a Georgia accent and suspicious eyes. Rodriguez was behind him, younger, nervous. "That's right." Jenkins spat tobacco juice on the floor. "Heard about you, the girl who thinks she can run a Ma Deuce." "I don't think I know." "We'll see. Jerry comes down that road, you freeze up, we're all dead. Just so you know." Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "Jenkins, man, come on." "Shut it, Rodriguez, I'm just statting facts." Jenkins moved to the gun, checking it himself, making a show of it. "You ever actually fire one of these in combat?" "No." "Then you don't know nothing." He looked at her hard. "My brother died at Kasserine Pass because a gun jammed. Gunner didn't know what he was doing, so excuse me if I ain't thrilled about this situation." Maggie met his stare. "I'm sorry about your brother, but this gun won't jam. I'll make sure of it." Jenkins snorted and moved to his position by the ammunition crates. Rodriguez gave Maggie an apologetic look but said nothing. She spent the rest of the afternoon checking and rechecking everything. The M2 fired a 50 caliber round that could punch through an inch of steel at 500 yards. In the right hands, it could take apart a German half-track like a tin can. In the wrong hands, it was useless weight. Maggie had first seen a Ma Deuce at her uncle's farm. He'd been a gunner in World War I and kept his old Browning in the barn, carefully preserved. illegal as hell. He'd shown her how it worked when she was 16, teaching her the mechanical symphony of springs and levers that made it function. This gun, he'd told her, saved my life more times than I can count. Treat it right and it'll do the same for you. She'd enlisted after Pearl Harbor, lying about her typing skills to avoid being shunted into clerical work. She wanted to fight. More than that, she wanted to prove that she could do what men did, maybe even do it better. The Army had other ideas. They put her in a typing pool in Virginia. For 18 months, she filed reports and typed memos while men went overseas and died. Then someone discovered her uncle's informal training. A desperate need for machine gunners, combined with a more progressive commander, had given her a chance. One chance, that's all she'd get. As darkness fell over Bostonia, Maggie sat by the gun and ate cold rations. Jenkins and Rodriguez talked quietly in the corner, deliberately excluding her. She didn't mind. She'd spent her whole life being excluded. Growing up on the farm, she'd been the daughter who should have been a son. In school, she'd been too smart, too forward, too unwilling to pretend to be less than she was. In the Army, she was a woman trying to do a man's job. Fine, let them doubt, let them whisper. When the Germans came, the gun would speak for her. Around midnight, the shelling started, not close but close enough. The building shook with each impact. Rodriguez prayed quietly in Spanish. Jenkins checked his rifle for the 10th time. Maggie watched the road. "You scared?" Rodriguez asked her suddenly. "Terrified," she said honestly. Jenkins laughed. "At least you ain't lying about it. Being scared doesn't mean you can't fight." "No," Jenkins said, his voice softer now. "No, it don't." The shelling went on for hours. When it finally stopped, the silence was somehow worse. In that silence, they waited for dawn and whatever it would bring. Maggie's hands never left the gun. The German attack came with the morning fog. Maggie saw them first, shadows moving in the gray mist that blanketed the road. She'd been awake for 36 hours straight, sustained by coffee so strong it could strip paint and the electric fear that kept every nerve alive. "Movement," she said quietly. 200 yards, multiple contacts." Jenkins was beside her in an instant, binoculars up. Jesus, half-tracks, at least 3, infantry behind them. Rodriguez crossed himself again. His hands shook as he opened another ammo can. The brass cartridges gleamed dully in the weak dawn light, each one as long as a man's hand. "Hold fire," came the order over the radio. "Let them close, make every shot count." Maggie's finger rested beside the trigger. The M2's butterfly trigger was unlike anything else in the American arsenal. Squeeze both sides and it would fire. Let go and it stopped instantly. Simple, effective, deadly. The half-tracks rolled closer. She could see them clearly now through the mist, German SD KFZ 251s, armored personnel carriers that could hold a dozen men each. Their sides were too thick for rifle fire, but not for the 50 cal, not for Ma-Deuce. Behind them came the infantry, gray shapes in their winter camouflage. A lot of them, more than intelligence had predicted. "Steady," Captain Davis's voice crackled over the radio. "All positions steady." 100 yards. Maggie could see the face of the German driver in the lead vehicle now. Young, maybe younger than Rodriguez. He was leaning forward, peering through the fog, trying to see what waited for him in the town. 75 yards. "Sullivan," it was Morrison on the radio. "You've got the lead vehicle, on my mark." Her world narrowed to the gun and the target. Everything else fell away, the cold, the fear, the doubt, the men who'd questioned whether she belonged here. There was only the weapon and what needed to be done. 50 yards. "All positions, fire." Maggie squeezed the trigger. The M2 roared to life with a sound like the end of the world. The heavy 50 caliber rounds hammered out at a rate of 500 per minute, each one leaving the barrel at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The recoil pounded through the mounting, but Maggie held firm, her body absorbing the shock the way she'd been trained. The effect on the half-track was immediate and catastrophic. The armor-piercing rounds punched through its front plate like it wasn't there. She could see the impacts, see the metal shredding, see the driver's compartment dissolve into a spray of steel and destruction. The vehicle lurched to the left and died, smoke pouring from its engine. Men tried to pour out of the back. Her training took over, traverse left, fire, traverse right, fire. Each burst found its mark. Jenkins was beside her, feeding the belt smoothly, keeping the ammo flowing. "Jesus Christ," he kept saying. "Jesus Christ." The other positions had opened up now. The whole American line was firing, but nothing sounded like the Ma Deuce. It was deeper, harder, a bass note beneath the higher crack of rifles and the chatter of light machine guns. The second half-track tried to reverse. Maggie tracked it, leading it slightly, and fired a long burst into its side. The rounds walked up the vehicle like a giant's fingers, punching through, finding something vital. It exploded in a ball of orange flame. The third vehicle managed to turn around, but not before she'd raked it from stem to stern. It limped away trailing smoke, men falling from its back like dying leaves. The infantry scattered, looking for cover where there was none. Some made it to ditches, most didn't. The 50 cal didn't discriminate, it went through walls, trees, sandbags, everything. A German soldier tried to hide behind a stone marker at the roadside. Maggie's burst went through the stone and through him. Then the barrel started to glow red. "Cease fire," she yelled, "changing barrel." Her hands moved automatically through the drill she'd practiced 1,000 times. Jenkins already had the spare barrel out, carrying handle attached. She locked the bolt back, removed the glowing barrel with asbestos mitts, slammed in the new one. 15 seconds. The manual said 20, but she'd always been fast. "Up," she shouted. More Germans were coming, these ones in white winter smocks, harder to see. But the Ma Deuce didn't need perfect visibility. She fired in controlled bursts now, conserving ammo, making each one count. A squad of Germans tried to set up a machine gun of their own. She obliterated their position before they could fire a shot. "Tank," Rodriguez screamed. "Tiger tank." It emerged from the fog like a prehistoric monster, 60 tons of German engineering and murder. Its 88 gun could destroy any American tank at 2 miles. Its armor was too thick for the 50 cal to penetrate from the front. But Maggie wasn't aiming for the front. She waited, watching the tank lumber forward. It rotated its turret toward a Sherman tank on the other side of town. The German commander was standing in his hatch, directing fire. Maggie fired a long burst at the commander's position. The 50 cal rounds couldn't penetrate the tank's main armor, but the hatch area was thinner. The commander disappeared in a red mist. The tank stopped, confused, leaderless. American bazookas did the rest. Without its commander, the Tiger couldn't coordinate its defense. 3 rockets hit it in the treads and rear, and it brewed up thick black smoke pouring into the winter sky. The German attack faltered, then broke. The survivors retreated into the fog, leaving their dead and wounded behind. The whole engagement had lasted maybe 15 minutes. It felt like 15 years. "Cease fire," came the order. "All positions, cease fire, conserve ammunition." Maggie took her hands off the gun. They were shaking now, adrenaline and exhaustion catching up with her. The barrel was hot enough to make the air shimmer around it. Empty brass covered the floor ankle deep. The room smelled of cordite and hot metal. Jenkins was staring at her. "Goddamn," he said softly. "Goddamn Sullivan." Rodriguez laughed, a high, slightly hysterical sound. "Did you see that? Did you see what she did to that half-track?" "I saw it," Jenkins said. He stuck out his hand. "I was wrong about you." Maggie shook his hand. Her palm was blistered from the gun, but she didn't care. "We ain't done yet," she said. "They'll be back." She was right. The Germans came again at noon and again at dusk. Each time the Ma Deuce met them, and each time they broke and ran. By nightfall, the road was a graveyard of destroyed vehicles and fallen men. Captain Davis came to her position after dark. He looked at the gun, at the pile of empty casings, at the 3 burned-out barrels stacked in the corner. "How many rounds?" he asked. "Lost count after 3,000, Maggie said. Her voice was hoarse from shouting orders over the gun's roar. "Morrison wants me to recommend you for a Silver Star." She blinked. "Lieutenant Morrison." "Says he's never seen shooting like that. Says you saved the whole sector." Davis smiled. "He's not wrong. You did good, Sullivan, real good." But Maggie was looking out at the road, at the shadows in the darkness. "Sir, they'll come again tomorrow. They have to. This road is the only way through." "I know. Think you can do it again." She looked at the gun, her gun, Ma Deuce, the weapon that had finally given her a voice that men had to listen to. "Yes, sir, I can do it again." And she did, day after day after day, until the German offensive broke against the stubborn defense of Bastonia like waves against a rock. The M2.50 caliber Browning machine gun became the sound of survival, the sound of victory. It became the sound that the Germans learned to fear. Part 3, The Devil's Gun. By the third day of the siege, the Germans had given Maggie's position a name. Die Teufelspistol, the Devil's Gun. She learned this from a captured German officer. Captain Davis brought him to the command post, a Wehrmacht lieutenant with a bandaged arm and the hollow-eyed look of a man who'd seen too much. Through an interpreter, he told them about the orders circulating among German units. Your position is marked on every map, the interpreter translated. They're offering an iron cross to whoever silences it. The men call it cursed. They say no one who attacks that corner of town comes back. Morrison whistled low. They're that scared of one machine gun. Not the gun, the German said in halting English. The witch who fires it. Maggie, standing in the back of the tent, felt a chill despite the small stove burning in the corner. The witch, another name to add to the collection. After the German was led away, Davis pulled her aside. You need rest, Sullivan, real rest. I'm rotating you off the line for 12 hours. Sir, with respect. That's an order, Sergeant. Jenkins and Rodriguez can hold the position. You've been awake for 3 days straight. You're no good to anyone if you collapse. He was right, though she hated to admit it. The exhaustion was starting to make her see things that weren't there, shadows in shadows, movement in stillness. Twice she'd almost fired on American patrols. She slept in the basement of a ruined house, surrounded by other exhausted soldiers. Her dreams were filled with the sound of the Ma Deuce, that deep, pounding rhythm that had become the soundtrack of her life. In her dreams, the gun spoke to her, told her secrets about trajectories and timing that she somehow understood. She woke 8 hours later to the sound of frantic shouting. Sullivan, where's Sullivan? She grabbed her rifle and ran outside. Rodriguez was there wild-eyed, his jacket torn and bloody. It's Jenkins, he gasped. German patrol got past our lines, they hit our position. Jenkins is down and they damaged the gun. Maggie ran. She ran faster than she'd ever run in her life, through streets cratered by artillery, past burning buildings and dead men. Her lungs burned in the freezing air, but she didn't slow down. The bakery building was pockmarked with new bullet holes. She took the stairs 3 at a time. Jenkins was on the floor, conscious but bleeding from his shoulder. The M2 sat silent on its mount, its receiver cover hanging open at an odd angle. German grenade, Jenkins said through gritted teeth. Bastards got close. I tried to stop them, but... Shut up and let me look. Maggie examined the gun with shaking hands. The grenade had hit the mounting, sending shrapnel through the receiver group. The bolt was damaged, the feed pawls bent, maybe the barrel too. In normal circumstances, this gun would need a depot-level repair. They didn't have hours. According to Rodriguez, the Germans were massing for another attack at dawn, less than an hour away. Can you fix it? Rodriguez asked. Maggie didn't answer. She was already working, her hands moving with the speed of desperation. She'd studied this weapon until she could see its parts in her sleep. Every pin, every spring, every tolerance and clearance. She stripped the bolt, examined the damage. The firing pin was cracked but might hold for a few hundred rounds. The extractor was bent but functional. She worked by feel as much as sight, her fingers remembering what her tired mind struggled to recall. Talk to me, Sullivan, Jenkins said. He was leaning against the wall, applying pressure to his wound. Tell me you can fix it. The feed mechanism is jammed, she said, her voice distant, focused. The pawls are bent, but I can straighten them. Maybe, the barrel might be true, might be warped. Won't know until I test fire. You got tools for this? Some. She pulled out her repair kit, the small collection of tools that every Ma Deuce gunner carried. Punches, a small hammer, files, spare pins. Not enough for what she needed to do. Never enough. She worked in the darkness, using a small flashlight clenched between her teeth. Remove the damaged parts. Straighten what could be straightened. Replace what could be replaced. Pray over the rest. Her hands bled from sharp edges and the cold. She didn't notice. Sun's coming up, Rodriguez warned from the window. I can see movement on the road. Not done yet. She reassembled the bolt, her fingers finding each component by memory. The bolt went back into the receiver with a satisfying click. The cover closed. She loaded a belt, her hands now moving with the ritual precision of a prayer. Moment of truth, she whispered. She pointed the gun down the road, where the morning mist was beginning to reveal German shapes, and squeezed the trigger. The Ma Deuce roared. The first burst was rough, the gun shaking more than it should, but it fired. She let off, checked the receiver. Hot but holding, she fired again, smoother this time. The gun was finding its rhythm, settling into the damaged but functional state she'd created. It works, Rodriguez breathed. Mother of God, it actually works. Won't last long, Maggie said. This is field expedient at best. Gun might blow up after a few hundred rounds, might last longer, no way to know. Then we better make those rounds count, Jenkins said. He'd struggled to his feet, his good arm reaching for an ammo belt. I can still feed. You're wounded. So what, you think I'm gonna sit this out? Not a chance, Sullivan, you fixed the gun. Least I can do is help you use it. The Germans came with the dawn, and this time they came prepared for the devil's gun. They'd brought mortars, set up in the ruins of buildings outside the town. The first rounds landed close, shaking the building, sending plaster raining down. They're targeting us specifically, Rodriguez said. They want this gun dead. Then they'll have to come through me, Maggie said. She fired carefully now, conscious that every round might be the one that caused the damaged gun to fail. The Germans advanced in a scattered line, experienced troops using cover, not giving her easy targets. She took them anyway, one by one, the Ma Deuce barking its lethal song. A mortar round hit the building next door. The shockwave knocked Rodriguez down. He got back up, blood streaming from his nose, and went back to his spotting position. Another round hit closer. The floor buckled, dust and smoke filled the room. Through it all, Maggie kept firing. She was beyond tired now, beyond scared. She'd entered a state that she would never be able to fully explain to anyone who hadn't been there. The gun was an extension of her body. The targets were mathematical problems to be solved. Each squeeze of the trigger was an answer. The Germans fell back, regrouped, came again. The Ma Deuce met them each time. The damaged parts held, barely, but they held. Then, during a brief lull, Jenkins spoke up. Sullivan, if we don't make it. We'll make it. But if we don't, I need you to know I was wrong about you. Dead wrong. You're the best gunner I ever saw, man or woman ain't even close. Maggie didn't look away from her sights. We're making it out of here, Jenkins, all three of us, and then you're buying the first round. Despite everything, he laughed. Deal. The Germans made one final push before noon. This time they brought up a flamethrower team trying to burn them out. Maggie saw them coming and made a split-second decision. She walked her fire right into the flamethrower's fuel tank. The explosion lit up the street like a miniature sun. After that, the Germans pulled back and didn't return. Night fell, and with it came silence. The unnatural, ringing silence of ears damaged by days of constant gunfire. Captain Davis found them still at their position, Maggie's hands still on the gun. It's over, he said gently. Relief column broke through, the siege is lifted. Over, Maggie repeated the word like she didn't understand it. Over, you did it, Sullivan, you held. She finally took her hands off the gun. They'd frozen into the shape of the grips, and it took a moment to unbend them. She looked at the Ma Deuce, her Ma Deuce, the gun that had somehow held together through impossible circumstances. Then she looked at the road, at the evidence of 3 days of slaughter, at what she'd done, at what she'd had to become. Yeah, she said softly, we held. But as they carried Jenkins down to the medics and Rodriguez stumbled along beside them, Maggie wondered what price they'd paid for that victory, and whether the bill was fully due. Part 4, The Weight of Glory. The war correspondence came 3 days later. Maggie was cleaning the Ma Deuce for the 100th time, her hands working through the ritual of maintenance that had become as natural as breathing. The position had been reinforced now, proper sandbags and overhead cover replacing the makeshift defenses they'd held the line with. It felt strange, almost luxurious. Sergeant Sullivan. She looked up. A man in his 40s stood in the doorway, wearing a correspondence uniform and carrying a notebook. Behind him was another man with a camera. That's me. Frank Morrison, Associated Press. No relation to your Lieutenant Morrison. I'm here to write about the Devil's Gun. Mind if we ask you a few questions? She did mind, actually, but orders were orders. The Army wanted good news stories, needed them for morale back home. So she answered questions while the photographer snapped pictures of her with the gun. Is it true you held this position alone for 3 days? No, sir. I had Corporal Jenkins and Private Rodriguez with me. Couldn't have done it without them. But you were the gunner. You fired the weapon. Yes, sir. How many Germans would you say you killed? The question hung in the cold air. Maggie looked down at her hands, at the oil stains that never quite came out, at the blisters and calluses and small scars. I don't know, she said quietly. I didn't count. I was trying to stop them from taking the town, from killing my friends. The correspondent wrote rapidly. Our sources say you're being recommended for the Silver Star, first woman to receive one in this war. How do you feel about that? I feel like a lot of men did a lot more than me and got nothing. I feel like Jenkins took a piece of shrapnel and kept feeding the gun anyway. I feel like Rodriguez stayed at his post when the building was falling down around us. They deserve medals, too. They're getting Bronze Stars, the correspondent said. But you're the story sergeant, the girl from Iowa who... I'm not a girl, Maggie said, her voice sharp. I'm a soldier. The correspondent blinked. Of course, I meant no offense. After they left, Rodriguez came up to the position. He'd been released from the aid station that morning, cleared for duty despite the persistent headaches from his concussion. You okay? He asked. Fine. You don't sound fine. Maggie set down the cleaning cloth. They're going to make me into something I'm not. A hero. A story. The brave girl soldier. They'll put my picture in papers back home and people will clap and it won't mean anything. Won't mean anything? Maggie, you saved this whole sector. You know how many men are alive because of what you did. And I know how many men are dead because of what I did. German men. Boys, some of them. I can still see their faces, Rodriguez. I see them when I close my eyes. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment. Then he said, My father was at Belleau Wood, First War. He used to have nightmares, even 20 years later. My mother said he'd wake up shouting orders, trying to save men who'd been dead for decades. That's supposed to make me feel better. No, but maybe it helps to know you're not alone. Every soldier who ever fought carries this weight. It's the price. Doesn't make you weak, makes you human. She looked at him, this boy, no, this man who'd stood with her through hell. Thanks, Rodriguez. Anytime, Sergeant. The medal ceremony came a week later. They'd cleared a courtyard in Bastonia, swept away the rubble, and set up a makeshift stage. Every soldier who could be spared from duty was there, hundreds of men in their worn uniforms and tired faces. General McAuliffe himself pinned the Silver Star to Maggie's chest. The same general who'd answered the German surrender demand with a single word. Nuts. This soldier, the general said, his voice carrying across the courtyard, represents the finest qualities of the American fighting man. Courage, skill, and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. Fighting man, Maggie almost smiled at that. Even now, even here, they couldn't quite bring themselves to say fighting woman. But when the general shook her hand and looked her in the eye, she saw something there she'd rarely encountered before. Respect. Not grudging, not qualified, real respect. The men applauded. Jenkins was there, his arm in a sling, whistling through his teeth. Rodriguez cheered. Even Lieutenant Morrison clapped, though he still looked slightly uncomfortable with the whole situation. After the ceremony, the men wanted to buy her drinks. They'd scrounged up some Belgian beer from somewhere, and someone had a harmonica, and for a little while they could pretend they weren't surrounded by death and destruction. Speech, someone called out, others took up the cry. Speech, speech. Maggie stood up, uncomfortable with the attention but unable to refuse. I'm not good at speeches, she started. I'm better at fixing guns and shooting straight, but I want to say something. A lot of you had doubts about me. Some of you still do. That's okay. I had doubts about me too. She paused, looking around at the faces. Some young, some old, all marked by war. But here's what I learned on that corner behind that gun. It doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It doesn't matter where you came from or what people expected of you. What matters is whether you can do the job when it needs doing, whether you can stand when others fall, whether you can be counted on when everything goes to hell. She touched the medal on her chest. This isn't mine. It belongs to Jenkins and Rodriguez and every man who held this town. It belongs to the cooks who kept us fed and the medics who patched us up and the officers who made the hard calls. We held together, or we didn't hold at all. She raised her cup. So here's to us, here's to the living and the dead, and here's to getting through tomorrow. To tomorrow, they echoed and drank. But even as she celebrated with them, even as she accepted their respect and their rough camaraderie, Maggie felt something changing inside her. The girl from Iowa was gone, left behind on that corner with the empty brass and the burned barrels. Someone else sat in her place. Someone harder, someone colder. Someone who could look down a gun sight at a human being and pull the trigger without hesitation. She wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing. That night, alone in her bunk, Maggie wrote a letter home. She told her mother about the medal, about the ceremony, about the men who'd become her brothers in arms. She didn't tell her about the nightmares. She didn't tell her about the faces she saw in the dark. She didn't tell her that sometimes, when she closed her eyes, all she could hear was the Ma Deuce's steady, pounding rhythm, like a mechanical heartbeat that never stopped. Some things, she thought, were better left unsaid. The next morning, new orders came down. They were moving out, pushing east toward Germany itself. The M2 was being loaded onto a truck, and Maggie was being reassigned to a new unit. New position, new mission. "You ready for this?" Captain Davis asked her as she prepared to leave. "Does it matter if I am?" He smiled grimly. "Not really, but you've proven yourself here, Sullivan. Wherever you go next, they're lucky to have you." As the truck pulled away from Bostonia, Maggie looked back at the town they'd held. It looked small from this distance, insignificant. Hard to believe that so much blood had been spilled over such a small piece of ground. But that was war. Everything important happened in small places, on lonely corners, behind a single gun, one decision at a time. The Ma Deuce sat beside her in the truck, cleaned and oiled and ready for the next fight. She rested her hand on its barrel, drawing comfort from the cold metal. "Where are we headed?" Rodriguez asked. He was coming with her along with a new crew. "East," she said, "toward Berlin." "Long way to Berlin." "Yes," Maggie said, "but we'll get there 1 mile at a time, one fight at a time." The truck rumbled on through the winter landscape, carrying them toward whatever came next. Behind them, Bostonia faded into memory. Ahead, the war waited. And in between sat a woman and her gun, ready for whatever the future held. The spring of 1945 found Maggie Sullivan on the banks of the Elbe River, staring across at the Russian positions on the far shore. The war was ending. Everyone could feel it. But like a wounded animal, it was most dangerous in its final moments. She'd been assigned to the 83rd Infantry Division, attached to a machine gun platoon that had fought its way from France to the heart of Germany. In the intervening months, the Ma Deuce had become as famous as the woman who fired it. Soldiers requested transfers to her unit. Officers sought her advice on defensive positions. The Germans still marked her gun on their maps and gave her wide berth when possible. But something had changed. The tide had turned so completely that sometimes they went days without firing a shot. The Germans were surrendering in droves, whole units walking out of the forest with white flags, looking for Americans to give up to before the Russians found them. It was April 23, 1945, when the final test came. "Sullivan, report to the command post," Lieutenant Morrison's voice crackled over the radio. He'd made captain in the month since Bostonia and had become one of her strongest advocates. She found him poring over a map with a colonel she didn't recognize. "Sergeant Sullivan, this is Colonel Webster, 83rd Division Intelligence." Webster looked up, his expression grave. "Sergeant, we have a situation. There's a hospital train trying to reach our lines. Allied prisoners, mostly, wounded men from POW camps. The Germans are evacuating them ahead of the Russian advance." "What's the problem, sir?" "The problem is that not all Germans got the memo. There's an SS unit between the train and our lines. They don't care about surrender. They want to go out fighting, and they've decided that train is enemy material." Morrison picked up the story. "The train is stuck on a damaged rail line about 5 miles from here. It can't move forward or back. The SS unit is moving to intercept it. They'll be there in approximately 2 hours." Maggie looked at the map. "How many men in this SS unit?" "Best estimate, about 200. Fanatics. Hitler Youth mixed with veteran soldiers. They're not taking prisoners and they're not surrendering." "And you want me to stop them?" "We're assembling a relief force, but they won't get there in time. But you, Sergeant, in a fast jeep with that Ma Deuce of yours." Webster let the sentence hang. "You want me to hold off 200 SS troops by myself?" "Not by yourself," Morrison said. "Rodriguez goes with you, plus 2 more gunners with .30 cals, and you'll have air support if the weather clears. But yes, essentially, you're the blocking force. You hold them until the relief column arrives. And if we can't hold them, Webster met her eyes. Then a lot of men who survived years in German prison camps die within sight of freedom. Men who have been waiting for this moment, dreaming of it. Men who deserve better. It was emotional blackmail, and they all knew it. But it was also true. How long do I need to hold? 2 hours, maybe less if we can expedite the relief force. 2 hours, against 200 SS troops, with a damaged rail line to defend and wounded men depending on her. I'll need more ammunition, she said. All the 50 cal you can spare. Webster smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Already being loaded. An hour later, Maggie stood beside the train, watching wounded men being moved into the sturdiest rail cars. They looked like skeletons, these prisoners. Their uniforms hung off them, and their eyes had the distant look of men who'd seen too much and hoped for too little. "Thank you," one of them said as she passed. He was an American major, his arm in a filthy bandage. "They told us someone was coming, didn't expect it to be." "A woman," she finished. "A guardian angel," he said softly. The train sat on an embankment, slightly elevated from the surrounding forest. Not ideal, but workable. She'd set up the M2 in a railcar with firing ports, giving her a clear field of fire down the approach road. The .30 caliber gunners were positioned to cover the flanks. Rodriguez was beside her, as always. "Just like old times," he said, trying for levity. "Old times was one corner in one town. This is different." "How so?" She looked at the wounded men, at their hopeful faces, at their desperate prayers for survival. "We can't fall back, can't reposition. Either we hold here or those men die." "Then we hold here." The SS came exactly on schedule. Maggie saw them through her binoculars first, a loose column moving through the trees, confident, unhurried. They thought they were chasing wounded men and a few guards. They had no idea what waited for them. She let them get close, closer than she'd let any Germans get since Bastonia. She needed to see who she was fighting, needed to be sure. Through the binoculars, she saw their faces. Young faces, mostly. Boys indoctrinated into hate, trained to kill, convinced they were fighting for something that mattered. But she also saw the veterans, the hard men who'd known exactly what they were doing when they'd chosen to fight to the end. At 300 yards, she opened fire. The Ma-Deuce spoke with the voice that Germans had learned to fear. The first burst caught the lead element completely by surprise, cutting through them like a scythe through wheat. The survivors scattered, seeking cover, trying to understand what had just happened. But there was no cover from a 50 cal. The rounds went through trees, through the light vehicles the SS had been using, through the earth itself. She fired in measured bursts, conserving ammunition, making every round count. The .30 cal gunners joined in, and for a few moments it seemed like it might actually work. The SS fell back, regrouped, tried to flank them, but Maggie had positioned the guns well. Every approach was covered. Every advance met with withering fire. Then the SS brought up mortars. The first rounds landed short, but they were adjusting. Maggie could see the mortar crews working, professional, efficient. Another few ranging shots, and they'd have the train's position dialed in. "Rodriguez, we need those mortars silenced." "On it." He called in the fire mission to the artillery observers with the relief force. Long minutes passed. The SS mortars crept closer. A round landed near the train, shrapnel pinging off the armor. Then American artillery arrived, heavy 155 shells that made the German mortars look like firecrackers. The forest erupted in fire and steel. When the barrage lifted, the German mortars were silent. But the SS kept coming. They attacked in waves now, small groups working together, using proper infantry tactics. These were the veterans, the men who'd survived the Eastern Front and the Western Front and everything in between. They knew their business. Maggie's world narrowed to the gun and the targets. Squeeze, traverse, release, squeeze, traverse, release. The rhythm became automatic, instinctive. Men fell and she kept firing. The barrel glowed red and she changed it without thinking. An ammo belt ran dry and Rodriguez had another ready before she could ask. Behind her, she could hear the wounded prisoners praying, crying, calling out encouragement. She couldn't think about them, couldn't afford to feel what they felt. There was only the gun and the targets and the mission. The SS tried to rush the train. She cut them down at 50 yards, They tried to sneak through the woods on the flanks. The .30 cal gunners found them. They tried to suppress her position with concentrated fire. She fired back, and the Ma Deuce's heavier rounds won every exchange. An hour passed. The barrel was on its last legs, smoking even when she wasn't firing. She'd gone through 3/4 of their ammunition. The relief force was still 15 minutes out. Then she saw him, an SS officer, young, maybe 30, organizing his men for one final push. He stood in a clearing, pointing, directing, leading. Through her sight, she watched him rally the troops, watched them respond to his leadership. She centered the sight on his chest. For a moment, just a moment, time seemed to freeze. She thought about the conversation with the captured German officer at Bastogne, about being called a witch, about the price of survival and the weight of necessary killing. This man was trying to kill wounded prisoners. He'd made his choice. Now she'd make hers. She squeezed the trigger. The officer fell, and with him went the last coordinated SS resistance. The survivors scattered into the forest, no longer a unit, just frightened men looking for escape. The relief force arrived 10 minutes later, 2 companies of American infantry who'd expected to find a battle and instead found it already won. Captain Morrison was with them. He took one look at the scene, the dead Germans, the smoking gun, the exhausted crew, the train.